I still remember the exact moment my life quietly split into two parts. The part before I knew the truth, and the part after I could never unsee it. If you had asked me back then who I trusted most in the world, I wouldn't have said a friend. I wouldn't have said a partner. I wouldn't even have said myself. I would have said my uncle. My name is Alexa, and this is the story of how the man I trusted more than anyone betrayed me, and how one secret turned the tables forever. It was late that night, too late for casual calls. The room was dark, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel louder than it should. My phone buzzed on the table, lighting up the wall beside me. An unknown number. I stared at it for a few seconds. I don't know why, but something inside me felt heavy, like my body already knew what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I answered. At first, there was only silence. Then a voice I didn't recognize spoke slowly, carefully. Alexa, you deserve to know what your uncle did. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. I don't think I even blinked. The voice continued, calm but serious, like they were revealing a fact, not starting a conversation. He's not who you think he is. And if you don't act now, you'll lose everything. Before I could ask a single question, the line went dead. That was it. No explanation, no name, just one sentence echoing in my head over and over again. You deserve to know. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, replaying the call in my mind. By morning, something inside me had already changed, even though I didn't yet understand why. To explain why that call mattered so much, you need to know who I was before it happened. I grew up in a small town where trust was normal. People left their doors unlocked. Neighbors knew each other's business, and not in a bad way. Life felt stable, predictable. My parents worked hard. We didn't have luxury, but we had warmth. I felt safe. Then, one night, everything ended. I was 17 when my parents were taken from me. No warning, no goodbye, just a knock on the door and words that didn't feel real when I heard them. That was the night my uncle became my whole world. He stood in front of me, eyes red but voice steady. He put his hands on my shoulders and said, "I've got you, Alexa. You're not alone." And I believed him. He took me into his home. He paid for my education. He guided my choices. When I was lost, he pointed the way. When I was scared, he told me I was safe. To everyone else, he was a successful businessman, respected, admired, the kind of man people trusted without question. To me, he was more than family. He was my anchor. He encouraged me to study business. He helped me land internships. He talked about our future, like it was something we would build together. "You're smart," he used to tell me. "One day, all of this could be yours." At the time, those words felt like love, like belief. I didn't know they were also a promise of control. The first signs that something was wrong didn't arrive loudly. They were quiet, easy to ignore. Documents appeared with my name on them that I didn't remember signing. Emails were sent from my account that I never wrote. Meetings were scheduled without anyone asking me. When I questioned him, he smiled. "Business moves fast," he said. "You'll understand with time." I trusted him, so I let it go. Then the money started acting strange. Savings I thought were mine suddenly had limits. Investments I believed belonged to me were listed under his company. When I asked, he told me it was temporary. Just paperwork, just protection. Protection from what I didn't know, but I didn't ask. When someone saves you at your weakest moment, you don't question their shadow. You tell yourself they must be right, because believing anything else feels like losing the only safety you have. Questioning him felt like questioning my entire life. So I stayed quiet. And he noticed. A week before that phone call, I found something I wasn't meant to see. A file on his desk. My name was written clearly on the front. Inside were financial records, legal forms, and signatures that looked like mine, but weren't. My stomach dropped. My hands shook. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There always was. I closed the file and walked away. I didn't confront him. I didn't know I was already running out of time. After the phone call, I couldn't let it go. The words wouldn't leave me alone. "You'll lose everything." The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I searched my uncle's name online, not the public version everyone knew, but the one buried beneath pages people don't usually click. That's when I found it. A lawsuit, quietly settled. Sealed records, no headlines, no noise. And there it was. My name. Listed as the affected party. My chest tightened. My vision blurred. I felt like the floor had shifted under my feet. Why was my name there? Why had no one told me? That was the moment I understood something terrifying. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't protection. This was planning. Every decision I thought I had made, every path I believed was mine, every opportunity I trusted, all of it had been guided, managed, controlled. That night, I stood outside his office door. He was on the phone, laughing. Then I heard him say my name, not with pride, not with warmth, but like I was an object. "She has no idea," he said, "and by the time she does, it'll be too late." In that moment, I stopped being his niece, and I became something else entirely. I did something far more dangerous. I stayed quiet. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying his voice again and again. "She has no idea." The confidence in his tone scared me more than the words themselves. It meant he wasn't guessing. He wasn't hoping. He knew. And if he knew, that meant this had been happening for a long time. The next few days felt unreal. I smiled when he spoke to me. I nodded when he gave advice. I thanked him when he checked in on me. On the outside, I was the same Alexa he believed he controlled. On the inside, I was watching everything. I started paying attention to details I had ignored before. The way he never used my full name in business settings. The way he spoke for me in meetings, even when I was sitting right there. The way documents were always too complicated for me to handle alone. "You don't need to worry about that," he'd say. "I'll take care of it." Those words used to make me feel safe. Now they made my skin crawl. I began reviewing old emails late at night. Slowly, carefully. I noticed patterns. Contracts where my signature appeared but the language benefited only his company. Accounts opened under my name that I had never accessed. Decisions made on my behalf that quietly transferred control away from me. The worst part wasn't the money. It was realizing how small he had made me without me even noticing. I had trusted him so deeply that I had stopped trusting myself. One evening, I finally asked a question, a small one, a harmless one. "Why is this account listed under your company instead of mine?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He didn't look up from his phone. "For efficiency," he said. "You're young. You don't need that responsibility yet." Yet. That word stayed with me. I realized something in that moment. He wasn't planning to give anything back. There was no later. No future where I stepped into control. I was the name on the paper. He was the hand holding the pen. The anonymous phone call returned to my mind. The voice had said I would lose everything. I finally understood what everything meant. Not just money, not just property. My future, my identity, my voice. A few days later, I took a risk. I contacted a former employee of my uncle's company. Someone who had left suddenly a few years earlier. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. People leave jobs all the time. Now I wondered why. We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of town. He looked nervous when he saw me, like he was expecting someone else to walk in behind me. "I shouldn't be here," he said before sitting down. "I just need the truth," I replied. "Whatever you know." He stared at the table for a long time before speaking. "Your uncle is very careful," he said slowly. "He doesn't force people. He guides them until they don't realize they've given everything away." My heart pounded. He told me about partnerships that ended with my uncle owning everything, about clients who trusted him and later realized they had nothing left, about documents rewritten at the last moment, always legal, always clean. "And you?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "I asked too many questions. That was it. No drama, no explosion, just quiet removal." As I walked home that night, one thought kept repeating in my head. This wasn't a mistake. This was his system. I began to understand the kind of man he really was. Not loud, not cruel in obvious ways. He didn't raise his voice or make threats. He didn't need to. He used trust as his weapon. I started collecting proof. Screenshots, copies of documents, email trails. Every night after he went to bed, I sat at my laptop, heart racing, afraid every click would give me away. I felt like I was stealing my own life back. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. My inheritance had been slowly absorbed into his company under legal technicalities I had never been taught to understand. My signature had been used to approve decisions that benefited him and limited me, and worst of all, it was all legal. That's when I realized something important. If I confronted him, he would win. If I exposed him too early, he would adapt. If I ran, he would still own my future. I needed something else. I needed leverage. The opportunity came unexpectedly. One afternoon, he asked me to attend a meeting with potential investors, big names, serious money. He wanted me there for one reason. My face. You represent the future, he said. They trust you. As we sat in that glass-walled room, listening to him speak confidently about growth and transparency, I felt something shift inside me. He was using my credibility to secure his next move. And suddenly I understood what the secret from that phone call might be. Not something he had done to me, but something he was about to do. After the meeting, I stayed behind, pretending to review notes. When the room emptied, I noticed a folder left behind. No label, no name. Inside were projections, transfers, timelines, and one line that made my blood run cold. Final consolidation complete, Alexa's assets fully absorbed. Final. That word hit harder than any betrayal. This wasn't ongoing, it was ending. He was almost done with me. That night I didn't cry. I didn't panic. For the first time since my parents died, I felt something sharp and clear. Resolve. If he had been planning for years, then I could plan too. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was quiet. He thought I didn't know. And that was his biggest mistake. Because the moment someone underestimates you is the moment the balance begins to shift. I didn't rush into anything after that night. That was the first rule I set for myself. People think revenge is loud, fast, emotional, but the kind that actually works is quiet, patient, invisible. I understood now that my uncle's greatest strength was also his weakness. He believed he was the smartest person in every room. He believed no one saw what he was doing. And most of all, he believed I was still the same girl who needed him. So I let him believe it. Every morning, I played my role perfectly. I listened, I agreed, I thanked him for his guidance, I asked for advice I already knew the answer to just to feed his confidence. Inside, I was building something entirely different. I started with knowledge, real knowledge, not the version he filtered for me. I spent hours reading about business law, asset control, and silent ownership. I learned how companies hide transfers inside protective structures. I learned how signatures could be used without breaking rules, and how trust could replace consent. With every page, the picture became clearer. He hadn't stolen from me in one move. He had drained me slowly so I wouldn't feel the loss. And the most terrifying part, if I did nothing, I would wake up one day with nothing in my name, and no legal way to fight it. That's when I made my first real decision. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't accuse him. I wouldn't warn him. I would let him finish what he started. Because the moment he believed he had won was the moment I could take everything back. I began reaching out quietly. Not to lawyers yet, not to authorities. That would come later. First, I needed perspective. I contacted people who had worked with him years ago. Most didn't respond. Some declined politely. A few warned me to stop asking questions. But one person agreed to meet. A woman in her early 40s. Calm. Sharp eyes. She had once been his business partner. He didn't betray me all at once, she told me as we sat across from each other. He made me feel protected. Like I didn't need to worry. She paused, then added, until I realized I didn't own anything anymore. I asked her how she survived it. She leaned forward. I left before he finished. That sentence stayed with me. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to finish it. Back home, I watched him closely. The way he checked his phone constantly. The way he scheduled meetings late at night. The way he always spoke in half statements, never fully revealing his plans. He was preparing for something big, and he was using me as the final piece. Then came the moment that confirmed everything. One evening, he called me into his office. His tone was warm, almost proud. I think it's time we formalize your role, he said. There's a document I'd like you to sign. I sat down slowly, keeping my expression neutral. What kind of document? I asked. Just a restructuring agreement, he replied casually. It simplifies things, helps with growth. I looked at the paper. My name was everywhere. But so was his company. I pretended to skim it. I asked a few harmless questions. He answered smoothly, confidently. Then I did something he didn't expect. I want to read it properly, I said. For a split second, his smile tightened. Of course, he said. Take your time, that hesitation told me everything. That night, I didn't just read the document. I understood it. If I signed it, my remaining control would be gone, legally, permanently. But if I didn't sign it, he would know something had changed. So I signed it. Not because I trusted him, but because I trusted my plan. From that moment on, the clock started ticking. Within days, he became more relaxed, more confident. He spoke openly about expansion, about selling parts of the company, about future deals. He believed the consolidation was complete. That belief made him careless. He started forwarding emails instead of deleting them. He discussed numbers in front of me that he never would have before. He assumed I wouldn't understand. He was wrong. One night, while backing up files on a shared system, I found something unexpected. A private folder. Hidden but not protected. Inside were recordings, phone calls, meetings, conversations he never thought anyone would hear. I sat there for hours, listening. My hands shook. Not from fear, from clarity. He had done this before to others, many others. He wasn't just controlling assets. He was manipulating people's lives. That was when the anonymous phone call finally made sense. Someone had tried to warn me, someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was. I didn't know who it was yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about me anymore. Still, I stayed quiet. I smiled at him the next morning. I thanked him for believing in me. I told him I was grateful for everything he had done. He nodded, satisfied. That evening, I made my final preparation. I contacted a lawyer, not to accuse, but to understand timing. I spoke to a financial advisor under a different name. I secured copies of every document I could legally access. I created backups, multiple ones, stored in places he could never reach. And then I waited, because the most powerful moment in any plan is letting your opponent think they've already won. He had no idea that every move he made now was being recorded, documented, and preserved. He had no idea that the girl he raised to trust him had learned how to watch him. And he had no idea that the secret he thought was buried was about to surface at the worst possible time. The stage was set. The trap was quiet, and soon he would walk straight into it, smiling. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come from me. It came from him. One morning, as I walked into the kitchen, I noticed he was already awake. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way he looked at me. Not warm, not proud. Measured, like he was checking something in his head and not liking the result. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Yes," I replied easily. "Why?" "No reason," he said, turning back to his coffee. "Just asking." But there was a pause after his words. A silence that hadn't been there before. From that day on, his behavior shifted in small ways. He asked more questions, not obvious ones. Subtle ones. "What did you work on last night? Who did you meet today? Why were you late?" Each question was casual on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. He was checking his control, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he still had it. I kept my answers simple, predictable, boring. I talked about work tasks he already knew about errands that didn't matter, about plans that led nowhere. The more ordinary I sounded, the more he relaxed. But I could feel it. He was watching. One evening, he brought up the restructuring agreement again. "You understand how important that document is, right?" He said. "I do," I replied. "It protects the company." He smiled, but his eyes stayed on me a second longer than necessary. "And you trust me?" he asked. That question wasn't about reassurance. It was about dominance. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. That answer satisfied him. For now, what he didn't know was that while he was watching me, I was watching something else entirely, the timing, because his next move was coming. I could feel it in the way meetings were being scheduled faster, in the way phone calls went late into the night, in the way he started talking about closing chapters and new phases. He was preparing to exit, and he wanted to exit clean. A week later, he announced a dinner. "Investors, partners, people who mattered. You'll be there," he said. Not a request. A statement. "They like you," he added. "You make things feel stable," that word again. Stable. I nodded, smiled, played my part. That night I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked calm, polished, confident, but behind her eyes was someone else entirely. At the dinner, everything went exactly as he planned. He spoke, they listened, he laughed, they leaned in. I smiled when expected. I nodded at the right moments. I said just enough to seem involved, but not enough to take attention. I could feel him relax beside me. Then, halfway through the evening, something unexpected happened. One of the investors turned to me and asked, "So, Alexa, how do you feel about the future of the company?" The room quieted. This wasn't planned. I glanced at my uncle, just briefly. There it was, a flicker of panic. Gone in less than a second, but I saw it. He hadn't prepared for me to speak freely. I smiled. "I think the future depends on transparency," I said. "People want to know who they're trusting." The words were simple. Safe. But they landed hard. My uncle laughed quickly. "She's idealistic," he said. "That's youth." I laughed too. But inside something shifted. That night when we got home, he didn't say much. He went straight to his office. Closed the door. I stood outside listening. Not to words. To silence. The kind of silence that means thinking, calculating, adjusting. The next day, he canceled 2 meetings without explanation. He changed passwords on shared systems. He started keeping his phone on him at all times. He wasn't relaxed anymore. He was defensive. That was the crack. Small. Invisible to anyone else. But I saw it clearly. He had begun to suspect that I wasn't just a piece on the board anymore. I needed to move carefully now. One wrong step and he would shut everything down. Delete files, lock access, change plans. So I slowed down. I stopped searching. I stopped asking questions. I stopped reacting. I became invisible again. And it worked. Within days, his tension faded. He returned to his routines. His confidence rebuilt itself. That's the thing about people like him. They want to believe they're in control so badly. They ignore the signs that they're not. Then came the message I had been waiting for, an email. Sent late at night. Subject line, final phase. Inside, just a few lines. We're moving faster than expected. Transfer scheduled. Everything should be complete by the end of the month. End of the month. That was my deadline. I had less than 3 weeks. That night, I opened the private folder again. I listened to more recordings. I read more messages. I mapped out timelines, connections, patterns. And then I saw it. The secret. Not hidden in numbers. Not buried in contracts. But in identity. He wasn't just using my assets. He was using my name. Companies registered under variations of it. Deals signed as if I were present. Trust built around my image. If everything collapsed, I would take the fall. That was his final move. Transfer everything. Step away. Let the blame land on me. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me focused. I finally understood why the anonymous caller had said I would lose everything. Not just what I owned, but who I was. That was when I made the most dangerous decision of all. I reached out, not to confront him, but to invite him. I suggested a public announcement, a celebration, a moment to mark the transition. He loved the idea. Of course he did. He thought it was the victory lap. He thought it was the moment everyone would see how well he had planned everything. He had no idea it would also be the moment everything unraveled. Because once something is brought into the light, it can never be hidden again. And the light was coming. The days leading up to the announcement felt unreal. Like I was walking through a version of my life that had already ended, even though no one else knew it yet. My uncle was energized in a way I hadn't seen before. He woke up early. He made calls with a confidence that bordered on celebration. He spoke about the future as if it were already secured, already locked away from risk. He thought the hard part was over, and in a way it was, just not for the reason he believed. I watched him carefully as plans came together. The venue was chosen, invitations were sent, investors confirmed, press contacts were quietly notified. It was framed as a transition moment, a formal step into a new phase of leadership and growth. On paper, it looked perfect. Public, clean, final, exactly the kind of ending someone like him would want. He kept involving me more now, asking for opinions, letting me speak during meetings, introducing me as the future. That part hurt more than I expected, because for the first time he was treating me like an equal, but only because he believed I was already finished. At night when the house was quiet, I worked. I organized files, I labeled recordings, I created timelines that showed patterns clearly, without emotion. I wrote summaries in simple language, so anyone could understand them. I didn't exaggerate, I didn't dramatize, I let the facts speak. Every document was backed up, multiple locations, secure access. If something happened to me, it wouldn't disappear. That thought crossed my mind more than once. There were moments when fear crept in. Late at night, when the weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me. When I wondered if I was imagining things, if I was overreacting. But then I would remember the lawsuit, the fake signatures, the recordings. And most of all, the sentence I had heard through the door. She has no idea. That sentence pushed me forward every time. 3 days before the event, something unexpected happened. I received another call, same unknown number. This time I answered immediately. "You're close," the voice said, "but be careful." "Who are you?" I asked. There was a pause. "Someone who didn't act in time," they replied. "Don't make my mistake." The line went dead. I stood there holding my phone, my heart racing. I didn't know if the call was meant to protect me or scare me. But it didn't change anything. If anything, it confirmed that I wasn't alone, that others had seen this pattern before and paid the price for staying quiet. The day before the announcement, my uncle called me into his office. He closed the door. "I want to thank you," he said. "You've handled everything very well." I nodded. "You've grown," he continued. "I knew you would." He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, confident. "You trust me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied. That word again. Trust. He smiled, satisfied. What he didn't know was that my trust was no longer in him. It was in the truth. The morning of the event arrived faster than I expected. I woke up early, my body tense but my mind clear. I dressed carefully. Not flashy, not dramatic. Neutral, professional, the kind of appearance that doesn't draw attention until it needs to. At the venue, everything was perfect. Soft lighting, clean lines, a sense of importance in the air. People greeted my uncle warmly. They shook my hand. They smiled at me like I was part of something admirable. If they only knew. As the room filled, I took my place near the front. My uncle stood at the center, confident, at ease. When he stepped up to speak, the room quieted immediately. He talked about growth, about trust, about legacy. Words he used beautifully. Words that meant nothing. Then he introduced me. "My niece, Alexa," he said proudly. "The future of this company." Applause filled the room. I stood, smiled, thanked them. My heart pounded, but my voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. He gestured for me to speak. This was supposed to be my role. A few supportive words. Gratitude, reassurance. I stepped forward. I looked at the audience. And then I looked at him. "I want to talk about trust," I began. The room leaned in. "For a long time, I believed trust meant letting someone make decisions for you," I said. I believed it meant staying quiet and being grateful. I could feel my uncle tense beside me. "But I've learned something important," I continued. "Trust without transparency isn't protection. It's control." A few people shifted in their seats. My uncle laughed lightly. "She's passionate," he said. I didn't stop. "I was raised to believe this company was built on honesty," I said. So I decided to look closer. The silence in the room was heavy now. "I found documents," I said calmly. "Recordings. Agreements made in my name without my consent." My uncle's smile faded. "This isn't the place," he started. "It is," I said, turning to face him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated facts. Screens behind us lit up. Documents appeared. Timelines. Clear, organized, undeniable. Gasps rippled through the room. My uncle stood frozen. I continued, my voice steady. "These records show a pattern. Assets transferred, control removed, responsibility shifted." I turned back to the audience. "And they show something else," I said. that when everything collapsed, the blame would land on me. Someone stood up. Another person whispered. The room was no longer controlled. My uncle finally spoke, his voice tight. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "She doesn't fully understand." "I do," I replied quietly. "Now I do." I stepped back. Security approached. Legal teams whispered. Phones came out. The moment had escaped him completely. For the first time, he wasn't directing the narrative. He was reacting to it. As the room descended into confusion, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not victory. Relief. Because the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. As I walked out of the venue, the noise faded behind me. Questions would come. Consequences would follow. But one thing was already clear. The man who built his power on silence had just lost it. And this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of what came after exposure. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves. The first wave was noise, calls, messages, headlines written without knowing the full story. People choosing sides before the truth had even settled. My phone didn't stop vibrating. Some messages were supportive, others were confused. A few were angry, demanding explanations I wasn't ready to give yet. I ignored them all, not because I didn't care, but because I knew something worse was coming. My uncle didn't speak to me that day. Not at the venue, not on the drive home, not even when we crossed paths in the hallway that night. His silence wasn't defeat. It was calculation. I had seen it before. That quiet pause he took when things didn't go his way. The stillness before he adjusted his strategy. That night, I slept with my phone beside me and my laptop open. Not because I was afraid. Because I was ready. The next morning, I woke up to the second wave. Lawyers. Not questions, not discussions. Warnings. Emails filled with carefully written language. Statements that looked polite on the surface but carried a clear message underneath. Be careful. Be precise. Be quiet. He was trying to reframe the story. By midday, a public statement appeared. Calm, controlled, familiar. It described the event as an internal misunderstanding. It praised my passion and framed my actions as emotional rather than factual. It suggested I had been overwhelmed by responsibility. He didn't deny the documents. He questioned my stability. That was when I realized something important. He wasn't going to fight the facts. He was going to fight me. Friends started calling. Some asked if I was okay. Others asked if I was being pressured by someone else. A few gently suggested I should take a break. That was his influence. Quiet, polite, effective. By the end of the day, I understood the new battlefield. This wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about credibility. And he had spent years building his. That night, he finally spoke to me. He stood in the doorway of my room, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do this," he said. I didn't answer. "We could have handled this privately," he continued. "You embarrassed yourself." That word landed harder than anything else. Not him. Me. "You're young," he said softly. "People will forget what you said. But they won't forget how you said it." I looked at him then. Really looked. For the first time, I didn't see the man who raised me. I saw someone cornered. "I didn't say anything that wasn't true," I replied. He sighed, shook his head. "Truth is flexible," he said. "Perception is not." Then he left. The third wave came faster. Accounts frozen, access removed, systems I had legally used for years suddenly unavailable. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was shutting doors. If I hadn't prepared backups, I would have lost everything overnight. That was when fear finally showed up. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet, the kind that asks questions at 3 a.m. What if he wins? What if people believe him? What if I did all of this for nothing? I sat alone in my room, surrounded by files and timelines, wondering if I had miscalculated. Then my phone rang again. Same number. The voice didn't waste time. "He's panicking," they said. "That's when he's most dangerous." "I know," I replied. "Good," the voice said. "Because now you need to do something most people can't." "What?" I asked. "Stay visible." The line went dead. Stay visible. I understood what that meant. Silence would let him control the story. Retreat would confirm his version. If I disappeared, he would win. So I did the opposite. I spoke, not emotionally, not defensively. Clearly. I released a short statement, not an accusation. not a rant, just facts. I attached documents, context, explanations written in simple language, no dramatic words, no personal attacks. I let people decide for themselves. The response was slower than the chaos, but it was stronger. Journalists asked better questions. Analysts noticed patterns. Former partners came forward quietly, sharing similar experiences. I wasn't alone anymore. That's when the fourth wave hit, anger. He stopped pretending. He accused me directly now, of betrayal, of manipulation, of trying to steal what wasn't mine. The irony didn't escape me, but the intensity did surprise me. He had always been controlled, strategic. Now he was emotional. That was another crack. One evening he confronted me again. This time his calm was gone. "You think you've won?" he snapped. "You've destroyed everything." "No," I said quietly. "I exposed it." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You've made yourself untouchable for 5 minutes," he said. "But this won't last." "Maybe not," I replied, "but it's lasting long enough." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said something that confirmed everything. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. "You would have been comfortable forever." There it was. Not denial, not regret, expectation. He truly believed silence was my role. That night, I moved out. Not in a dramatic rush. Not with arguments. I packed what mattered: documents, drives, memories. I didn't look back. The weeks that followed were heavy. Meetings with lawyers, long conversations, endless questions. Some days felt like progress, others felt like standing still. But something inside me had shifted permanently. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I wasn't asking to be believed. I was standing in what I knew. And slowly, that changed everything. The narrative began to turn. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough. Enough for regulators to ask questions. Enough for partners to pause deals. Enough for people to realize this wasn't a single emotional moment. It was a pattern finally brought into the light. One evening, as I sat alone in a small apartment that felt both empty and free, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who believed trust meant silence. The one who thought safety came from obedience. She was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone who understood that speaking up doesn't end fear. It just changes who controls it. And my uncle? He was still fighting. But now, he was fighting in public. And that was a battle he had never prepared for. The shift didn't happen in one dramatic moment. There was no single headline that ended everything. It happened quietly. In pauses, in delays, in the way people stopped returning his calls. At first it was subtle: a meeting postponed, a deal under review, an investor who suddenly needed more time. My uncle pretended not to notice. He continued as if nothing had changed. He spoke confidently in interviews. He released statements filled with calm language and familiar promises, but I could see it. The confidence was thinner now, the pauses longer, the control weaker. Meanwhile, something else was happening. People were reaching out to me, not loudly, not publicly, privately. Former employees, former partners, people who had once trusted him the way I did. They didn't want attention. They wanted understanding. One by one they shared their stories, different details. Same pattern: they had trusted him. They had signed papers they didn't fully understand. They had believed they were protected, until they weren't. Each story filled in another gap. Each voice made the picture clearer. This wasn't a conflict between a niece and her uncle. It was a system finally being seen. That realization changed how people treated me. Not everyone believed me, some never would. But enough did. And in situations like this, enough is everything. The pressure started showing in ways my uncle couldn't control. A regulatory inquiry opened quietly. No announcement, no spectacle, just questions. Then another. Then a pause in operations. He still didn't call me. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted an apology, but because part of me still wondered if he ever saw me as anything more than a name on paper. I got my answer a week later. We crossed paths at a legal office. He was leaving as I arrived. For a moment we stood there, face to face. No audience, no strategy. Just us. "You've taken this too far," he said. His voice was tired now. Not angry, tired. "I told the truth," I replied. He shook his head slowly. "You told your version," he said, "and people chose to listen. That sentence revealed everything. To him, truth was always optional. People were just pieces that could be arranged. I realized then that he wasn't angry because he'd been exposed. He was angry because he'd lost control of the story. As weeks passed, consequences began stacking up. Assets frozen pending review, partnerships dissolved, boards stepping in. None of it happened fast, none of it was satisfying in a dramatic way. But it was real, and it was irreversible. During that time, I was offered something unexpected, a settlement, quiet, generous, no admission of wrongdoing. All I had to do was sign, stay silent, and walk away. For one long night I considered it. Not because I wanted the money, but because I was tired of being watched, tired of explaining, tired of carrying something so heavy. But then I thought about the voice on the phone. I didn't act in time. I thought about the people who had trusted him before me. And I thought about the version of myself who had believed silence was safety. I declined. The next day my uncle finally reached out. Not through lawyers, not through statements, directly. His message was short. You've made your choice. I replied just as simply, so did you. After that, everything accelerated. The inquiries became formal. The evidence connected. The timelines aligned. Nothing happened in public yet, but behind closed doors, the structure he had built was collapsing. I felt something unexpected during that time. Not joy. Release. The constant tension I had lived with for years began to fade. The fear of questioning. The weight of obedience. It was gone. I began to build something of my own. Slowly, carefully, on my terms. I took meetings again, not as a symbol but as myself. People didn't see me as his niece anymore. They saw me as someone who had survived something and spoken anyway. One evening I sat alone, thinking about how strange it was that betrayal had led me here. To clarity, to independence. And I realized something. Revenge didn't come from hurting him. It came from no longer needing him. My uncle still had resources. He still had defenders. He still believed he would recover. Maybe he would, in some form. But the version of power he once had was gone. Because power built on silence collapses the moment someone speaks. And I had spoken. The quiet after everything began to settle was the strangest part. I had imagined resolution would feel loud, victorious, clear. Instead, it felt like standing in an empty room after a storm, listening to water drip from the ceiling, realizing the danger had passed but the damage was real. By the time section 9 of this story begins, my uncle was no longer fighting the way he used to. The confidence was gone. The sharp control had softened into something defensive, almost fragile. He still made statements, still tried to protect his image, but they no longer carried weight. People were listening now. Not just to me, but to each other. The inquiries had turned into full reviews. Decisions that once took hours now took months. Every move he made was watched, questioned, slowed. For a man who thrived on speed and control, that was punishment enough. I didn't attend the meetings anymore. I didn't sit across tables arguing points or defending my truth. That part of the fight was over. The truth didn't need me standing beside it anymore. It could stand on its own. I focused instead on rebuilding myself, not publicly but privately. I moved into a small place that didn't carry echoes of the past, no offices, no boardrooms, just quiet, clean space, neutral walls. For the first time in years, my decisions were small and entirely mine. What time I woke up, what I ate, where I went. Those things might sound insignificant, but to someone who had lived under invisible control, they felt powerful. Every so often my uncle crossed my mind. Not with anger, with clarity. I understood him now better than I ever had when I trusted him. He wasn't driven by hatred or greed alone. He was driven by fear. Fear of losing relevance, fear of being replaced, fear of not being needed. And I had been his solution, until I wasn't. One afternoon, I received a final update from my lawyer. Short, direct. The case wouldn't be dramatic. There would be no public spectacle. No one would be dragged through headlines. But restrictions were in place. Oversight was permanent. His freedom to operate the way he once had was gone. He won't be able to do this again, my lawyer said. That mattered more to me than any punishment. Because what he did to me wasn't unique. It was repeated, and repetition only ends when someone interrupts it. That evening, I received one last message from the same unknown number. No warning this time, just words. You finished what I couldn't, thank you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted the message. Not because it didn't matter, but because I no longer needed reminders of the past to move forward. As time passed, people stopped asking me about him. They stopped framing my story around betrayal and started asking about what I was building next. That shift told me everything. The story had changed. And so had I. I realized then that the real turning point wasn't exposure or revenge or even justice. It was distance. Distance from manipulation. Distance from fear. Distance from needing approval from someone who never intended to give it freely. After a story like this, my uncle faded into the background of my life. They expect closure to arrive with a bang. Himself into the center. A final confrontation, quietly. A clear winner standing in the light. But real endings don't work that way. Because the opposite of control isn't dominance. When you stop looking back, freedom. By the time everything truly ended, my uncle was no longer part of my daily thoughts. Not because I had forgiven him, and not because I hated him, but because he no longer had power over my life. That was the real ending. I didn't wake up one day feeling healed. Healing wasn't a moment. It was a series of small choices made without fear. Choosing what to believe, choosing who to trust, choosing myself. For a long time, I had confused loyalty with silence. I thought being grateful meant giving someone control over my future. I believed love meant obedience. I was wrong. What I learned is this: anyone who demands your silence in exchange for protection is not protecting you. They are protecting themselves. Betrayal doesn't always come with cruelty. Sometimes it comes wrapped in care. Sometimes it looks like guidance. Sometimes it feels like safety. That's what makes it so dangerous. Looking back, I don't regret trusting my uncle. Trust says more about the person who gives it than the one who abuses it. I was open. I believed in people. That wasn't weakness. Staying silent after learning the truth would have been. When I finally spoke, I didn't do it to destroy him. I did it to save myself. Everything that followed was simply consequence. People often ask if I feel like I won. The answer is no, because winning suggests there was a game I wanted to play. What I feel instead is free. Free from walking on eggshells. Free from second-guessing my instincts. Free from thinking my worth came from someone else's approval. My uncle once told me I could have stayed comfortable forever. He was right. But comfort built on control isn't comfort at all. It's a cage. If there's one lesson I hope stays with you after hearing my story, it's this. Pay attention to who benefits when you stay quiet. Pay attention to who feels threatened when you ask questions. And never confuse gratitude with debt. You don't owe your future to someone just because they were there during your past. The moment I understood that, everything changed. Not because the world suddenly became fair, but because I finally stood in it as myself, and that is something no one can ever take away again.